Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I am so glad you could join us for this deep dive into something that's incredibly useful. How to discuss your financial goals in English.
Yeah, that's a really great topic. It can be a little bit, intimidating to talk about finances, especially in another language. I'm Sarah, and I'm excited to kind of break down this process for you.
That's a great point. I think a lot of people feel that way. So can you imagine confidently talking about investments, or maybe negotiating a business deal, or even just chatting with friends about your financial hopes and dreams, all in English? That's really what we're aiming for in this deep dive, right?
Absolutely. And, it's not just about knowing the words, the vocabulary, although that is super important. It's also about gaining the confidence to navigate real-life financial conversations in English, in different contexts.
Okay, so let's talk about why this is so valuable. What kind of opportunities open up when you can comfortably discuss your financial goals in English?
Well, Mike, English is often the language of global finance and international collaboration, right? So by mastering the skill, you're really opening doors to a world of possibilities. Things like securing loans from international institutions or collaborating with partners across the globe.
That's a fantastic point. It's about expanding your horizons and equipping yourself to really thrive in a globalized world. So how do we start this journey?
Well, let's lay a good foundation, right? Some fundamental vocabulary. So let's think about those basic terms that we use every day when we talk about money. Things like budget, income, expenses, savings.
Okay. Those are familiar even to someone like me who's still learning.
Right.
But how do we use these words, effectively in a conversation?
Okay, so let's take the word budget, for example.
Yeah,
right?
right.
If you're talking to a friend about your spending habits, you could say something like, hey, I'm trying to create a monthly budget to save for a trip to Europe, right? So it clearly conveys that you're actively managing your money to achieve a specific goal.
That's a really great example. It's simple, it's clear, it's relatable. Now, what about income? How can we use that word naturally?
Imagine you just got a promotion at work, right? You could tell a colleague, my income has increased since my promotion, so I'm finally able to start investing. This shows you understand income as the money you earn from your job.
Perfect. Now let's tackle everybody's favorite topic, expenses. How do we bring those up without, sounding negative?
Okay. You could frame it in a positive way, right? You could say, I'm trying to reduce my monthly expenses by cutting back on eating out so I can afford to take a language course. This highlights, that you're making conscious choices to prioritize what's important to you.
I like how you turn that potentially negative topic into a really positive statement about, personal growth. And finally, let's not forget savings, the cornerstone of financial well-being, right? So how do we explain this concept in English?
You could say, I'm committed to putting a portion of my income into savings each month to build a safety net for unexpected events. This demonstrates that you're thinking long-term and prioritizing financial security.
Excellent. So we've covered some of the basics, but I know there's so much more to explore when it comes to discussing specific financial goals, right?
Absolutely. We need to expand our vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
And delve into the language of short-term and long-term goals. These terms help us differentiate between, those immediate desires and those bigger, life-changing aspirations.
Yeah, yes. It's like the difference between getting that fancy coffee today versus, planning for a comfortable retirement decades from now.
Uh-huh.
So how do we explain these distinct goals in English?
Okay, so let's say you're aiming to pay off a small debt quickly, right? You could say, my short-term goal is to pay off my credit card balance within the next 3 months. So that specific time frame emphasizes the immediate nature of this objective.
That's clear and concise. Now let's shift gears to a larger aspiration. How would you describe a long-term goal, like, say, buying a home?
You could say, my long-term goal is to purchase a house within the next 5 years. So again, that time frame clarifies the extended nature of this ambition.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I could actually articulate my own financial goals with more confidence. But achieving these big dreams, whether short-term or long-term, often involves hitting smaller targets along the way, right? So how do we talk about these milestones in English?
Okay, imagine you're saving to start your own business. You could say, reaching $5,000 in savings is a significant milestone towards my goal of launching my own company. This shows that the milestone is a stepping stone toward a larger vision.
It's like breaking down a marathon into those manageable segments. Now let's talk about growing our money. This brings us to the exciting world of investments, which sometimes can feel like a whole new language.
It can be, but with a few key terms, you'll be able to navigate this terrain confidently. So let's start with the word invest itself. You could say, I'm considering investing in mutual funds to potentially grow my savings faster.
Okay, that's a good start. But what about the potential rewards and, of course, the risks that come with investing?
That's where the term return comes in. You could say, I'm hoping for a solid return on my investments, but I understand there are risks involved.
And how do we explain that concept of risk in a way that makes sense?
Simply put, you could say, I'm aware that higher potential returns usually come with higher risks. It's a straightforward way to acknowledge that investing involves a balance, between potential gains and losses.
That makes sense. It's all about finding that balance between risk and reward. Now, when we talk about our investments as a whole, what's the term that we use?
We call that our portfolio. You could say, I'm working with a financial advisor to diversify my investment portfolio across different asset classes. This demonstrates a strategic approach to managing your investments.
This is fantastic. We're building a solid vocabulary for talking about investments. But let's be real, sometimes our financial goals involve managing something a bit less exciting: debt. So how can we comfortably discuss this topic in English?
It's true that debt can be a sensitive subject, but it's crucial to be able to discuss it openly and honestly. So let's say you're focused on paying down a student loan. You could say, I'm diligently paying down my student loan debt to achieve financial freedom sooner. So this showcases a proactive approach to managing your debt.
Right. And how do we use terms like loan and interest in conversation? They always seem to trip me up.
Okay, so for loan, you could say, I took out a small personal loan to cover some unexpected medical expenses. This clearly explains that you borrowed money for a specific purpose.
And interest. That one always seems so complicated.
Well, think of it as the cost of borrowing money. You could say, the interest rate on my loan is quite high, so I'm making extra payments to pay it off quickly.
Okay, that's a much clearer way to explain it. And speaking of important financial concepts, let's not forget about credit. Seems like credit scores play a major role in the English-speaking financial world. So how do we bring up this topic naturally?
Imagine you're planning to buy a house in the future. You could say, I'm working on building my credit score so I can qualify for a mortgage with a favorable interest rate. This demonstrates, that you understand the importance of establishing good credit.
This is so incredibly helpful. We've covered so much ground already, from basic terms to investments and even debt.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put these words together into smooth-flowing sentences and conversations?
Well, that's where the power of phrases comes in. We need to move beyond individual words and explore some key expressions that will help you confidently navigate different stages of a financial discussion. Are you ready to take it to the next level?
Absolutely. Let's dive into the art of crafting those perfect phrases for financial conversations in English. Okay, I'm ready. How do we start these conversations?
Well, think about those casual conversations you might have with friends or colleagues. You could ease into it by saying something like, hey, I've been thinking a lot about my financial future lately. Have you given much thought to your own goals?
Okay, that's a good way to open the door without feeling too pushy. It kind of invites the other person to share if they're comfortable. So once we've, kind of sparked that interest, how do we actually articulate our goals clearly?
Well, specificity is key. Instead of just saying, oh, I want to save more, give some concrete details. Like you could say, my main goal is to save $15,000 in the next 2 years for a down payment on a condo. The numbers and the time frame really paint a clear picture of your ambition.
I like how you made it measurable and tangible. It's not just some vague desire, it's an actual plan. So what if we're feeling a little lost and we want to get some advice from someone with more experience? How can we politely ask for advice?
Well, you could frame it as a request for their insights, right? Recognizing their expertise. You could say something like, I'm really impressed with how you've managed your finances. Would you be willing to share any tips on how I could reach my goal?
That's a great approach. It acknowledges their knowledge while expressing, your own willingness to learn. So what about when someone asks us about our own finances? How do we respond thoughtfully without feeling obligated to overshare?
You can definitely strike a balance there. Acknowledge their question, but maintain some privacy. So you could say, that's a good question. I'm still kind of exploring different options, but I'll definitely keep you posted. It allows you to deflect without feeling pressured.
These are really useful phrases. I feel much more equipped to handle those tricky conversations. But let's not forget about the backbone of any language grammar. So how do we make sure we're using the right tenses and structures when discussing financial matters?
Oh, that's a crucial point. Clear grammar is so important to make sure your message is understood accurately, especially when you're talking about something as important as finances. So let's start with the present tense. We use that to discuss our current habits and routines. For instance, you could say, I typically allocate about 30% of my income towards rent each month.
Okay, so the present tense helps us paint a picture of our current financial habits. What about when we're talking about our aspirations for the future?
Well, then you would use the future tense. Imagine you're talking about retirement plans. You could say, I will start contributing more to my retirement fund once I receive my annual bonus. So using will signals a clear intention for the future.
And if we want to reflect on past financial experiences, what tense would we use then?
You would naturally use the past tense to describe completed actions. Like, last year I successfully paid off all my outstanding credit card debt.
This is all making a lot of sense. What about when we want to explore hypothetical situations or different possibilities?
That's when you would use conditional sentences. Let's say you're considering investing in the stock market. You could say, if the market continues to perform well, I would consider investing a portion of my savings. So you're using if to introduce a condition and would to express a potential action.
Okay. These grammar tips are fantastic. I feel like I'm gaining a much deeper understanding of how to structure sentences. But sometimes, even with the right vocabulary and grammar, I still feel like my conversations lack structure. It's like, I have all the ingredients, but I can't bake the cake.
I get it. It's so easy to get sidetracked or ramble, especially when you're talking about complex topics like finance. That's why having a simple framework to organize your thoughts can be incredibly helpful.
Okay, I'm ready for the recipe for a well-structured financial conversation. What's the first ingredient?
Start with a clear introduction. Let the person know why you're bringing this up. You could say something like, I've been reevaluating my financial priorities and I would appreciate your insights on planning for the future. So it kind of sets the context and signals your intention.
Okay, that sets a great foundation. What comes next?
Once you've introduced the topic, articulate your specific goals. Use those measurable details we talked about earlier. You might say, my primary objective is to save $25,000 over the next 3 years for a down payment on a house.
That's crystal clear. What's the next step in building this framework?
After stating your goals, outline your plan. How do you intend to achieve them? For example, you could say, to reach this goal, I'm going to increase my monthly savings by $200 and explore ways to generate passive income.
It's like a roadmap to success. But what about those challenges, that pop up along the way? How do we address those in a conversation?
Don't shy away from them. Acknowledge those potential obstacles. It shows that you've thought things through. You could say, I know it might be tempting to, splurge on unnecessary things, but I'm determined to stay disciplined and focused on my goal.
That's a great strategy. Anticipate the hurdles and have a plan. So is there anything else we should keep in mind when structuring these conversations?
Absolutely. If you're seeking advice, conclude by inviting the other person to share their thoughts. You could say something like, what are your thoughts on this approach? I'd really value your perspective. It shows that you're open to learning from their experiences.
This framework is so helpful. It really provides a clear path. But there's one more element that can really impact how our message is received, especially in different cultures: cultural awareness.
You're absolutely right. Cultural nuances play a huge role in how we communicate, especially when we're discussing sensitive topics like money.
So let's explore some key cultural considerations to keep in mind. What's the first thing we should be mindful of?
Well, in many English-speaking cultures, while directness is valued, a bit of politeness and tact goes a long way, especially when talking about money. So instead of bluntly saying, I need a raise, you could phrase it more diplomatically, like, I'd like to discuss my salary expectations in light of my recent contributions.
That's a much more nuanced approach. Focuses on collaboration rather than making demands. What other cultural nuances should we be aware of?
Avoid bragging or boasting about your financial achievements. Humility is generally appreciated. So instead of saying, I made a fortune, you could simply say, I've been fortunate with some of my investments.
That's a good reminder. It's about expressing gratitude without sounding arrogant. So any other essential cultural tips?
Yes. Respect other people's privacy. It's considered rude to pry into their income or spending habits unless they specifically invite you to do so. So remember, financial matters are often seen as personal.
Those are all really insightful points. Cultural awareness is so essential for building trust. But I know for many of our listeners learning English as a second language, the idea of putting all this into practice can still feel daunting.
Of course. It's natural to feel nervous speaking a new language, especially when it comes to something as personal as money. But remember, fluency comes with practice and patience.
So what are some practical tips for overcoming these challenges that non-native speakers might face? Let's start with pronunciation. Those tricky English words can be real tongue twisters.
Absolutely. One helpful technique is to break down longer words into syllables. For example, the word budget, you can break it down into budget. Practice each syllable separately and then blend them together. And don't be afraid to exaggerate the sounds at first. It helps train your tongue.
That's a good tip. Breaking things down can make them feel much less intimidating. So what about when we feel overwhelmed by those complex financial concepts? How can we simplify things?
Well, instead of using all that technical jargon, try explaining things in plain language as if you were talking to a friend who isn't familiar with those terms. For example, instead of saying, I'm diversifying my investment portfolio, you could say, I'm spreading my money across different types of investments so I don't lose everything if one of them doesn't do well.
Okay, that's much more relatable.
Yeah.
Breaks it down into simple everyday language.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification. If you hear a word you don't know, just ask. Most people are happy to explain things in simpler terms. Remember, learning is a two-way street.
Asking questions is such an important part of learning. It shows you're engaged. So for our listeners who are feeling really motivated and want to take their financial English to the next level, what recommendations do you have?
One fun way to enrich your vocabulary is to learn some common idioms related to money.
Ooh, I love idioms. They add so much personality to the language. Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Let's take the idiom, tighten your belt. It means to reduce your spending, you live more frugally. You could say, with the recent increase in gas prices, we've had to tighten our belts and cut back on unnecessary expenses.
That really paints a vivid picture. It's like understanding a cultural concept in one phrase. What other tips do you have for taking our financial English to that next level?
Immerse yourself in authentic content. Explore books, podcasts, or even financial news websites that use real-life examples of financial language. It's a great way to absorb new vocabulary naturally.
That's a great idea. Surrounding yourself with the language can accelerate your learning.
And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's all part of the process. Embrace those mistakes as opportunities to grow.
That's such an empowering message. It's about viewing mistakes as stepping stones. So before we move on to our final segment, what's one piece of advice you would offer to those listeners who are maybe still hesitant or unsure about discussing their financial goals?
I would say believe in yourself. Learning a new language, especially one as nuanced as English, it takes time and dedication. Be kind to yourself, celebrate those small victories, and never stop pushing yourself to grow.
That's fantastic. It's about cultivating a positive mindset and embracing the journey. So let's move on to our final segment where we'll explore this powerful concept that connects our financial goals with our deeper values. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into discussing financial goals in English, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about aligning our financial goals with our values. It's such an important concept.
It really is. It's about recognizing that money is more than just numbers. It's a tool that can help us, build a life that reflects what truly matters to us.
I really love that perspective. It's not just about, getting rich. It's about making choices that support the kind of life we want.
Precisely. Think of your financial goals as stepping stones that kind of lead you towards, your ideal life. Each goal should be aligned with those core values, those beliefs that shape your priorities and guide your choices.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. So how can our listeners start to connect their financial goals with their values? Sounds like a pretty in-depth process.
It can be, but it's so rewarding.
Yeah.
Start by taking some time for self-reflection. Ask yourself some key questions like, what brings you joy and fulfillment? What impact do you want to make on the world? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Wow, those are some really thought-provoking questions. They make you really think about what matters.
Exactly. And once you have a better understanding of your values, you can start to align your financial goals with them. Your money becomes a way to support the life you envision.
Can you give us some specific examples of how someone's values might actually influence their financial decisions? I'd love to see how this works in real life.
Of course. So let's say someone really values family and togetherness. Their financial goals might be all about creating a loving environment for their loved ones. They might prioritize saving for their children's education, or investing in a comfortable home, or planning those memorable family vacations.
That makes total sense. Their financial decisions are supporting their desire to create a strong family life. What about someone who values adventure and new experiences? How would that translate into financial goals?
Well, they might prioritize saving for travel, investing in experiences rather than material things, or even, pursuing a career that offers flexibility and the ability to travel. Their goals become a way to fuel their passion for exploring the world.
I see how their choices reflect their desire for growth and new experiences.
Mhm.
What about someone who's passionate about making a difference in the world? How can their values guide them?
Well, they might choose to donate a portion of their income to charity, or invest in companies that align with their ethical beliefs, or even start their own business that addresses a social or environmental problem.
It's incredible how our values can impact not just our personal lives, but also our financial decisions. It's about finding that connection where our money supports the things we deeply care about.
It really is.
Yeah.
And remember, our values can change over time as we grow and learn. That's completely normal. The important thing is to check in with ourselves every now and then, reassess our values, and make sure our goals are still aligned with what's important to us.
That's a great reminder. It's about being intentional with our money so that it helps us create a life that we truly love.
Absolutely. It's about creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling, both financially and personally.
Well said. This has been such an insightful and empowering conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise on discussing financial goals in English and for reminding us about the connection between our values and our financial choices.
It's been my pleasure. I hope our listeners feel confident and ready to navigate financial conversations in English.
And to all of our amazing listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical tools to help you articulate your aspirations with more clarity and confidence. Remember, practice makes progress. So keep challenging yourself and celebrate those small wins along the way. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more deep dives into essential English skills. We'll be back soon with more tips and strategies to help you achieve your language learning goals. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving toward the life of your dreams.